Come to the bigger stuff. Oh, I know you want to sit by.
I do want to sit in the middle.
You want to come on? Here. Teach somebody else to do that. Good afternoon and welcome to the December Crop Production and WASDE briefing. My name is Lance Honig and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NASD. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We are very pleased to have Dr. Seth Meyer, USDA's chief economist, join us as Secretary Designate today. We also welcome Dr. Scott Hutchins, USDA's Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics. Also, we welcome Dr. Cindy Nickerson, USDA's Deputy Chief Economist, joining us today. Also, Dr. Meyer, I'd like to point out that we do have some visitors with us today scattered around the room. So you will see some ag scholars from Farm Foundation, as well as various USDA staff that you probably recognize joining us for today's special occasion. So thank you for your service. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NAS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NAS will host a social media event at 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer to the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn it over to Anthony Prilman, Acting Chief of the NAS Crops Branch. Anthony will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, Chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Anthony.
Thank you, Lance. Good afternoon. I too want to welcome all those who have joined us here today, as well as those who have tuned in for the live stream. All right, before we get to the numbers in today's crop production report, let's first look at the data sources that we use to establish the estimates. Now, this month we conducted our cotton ginning survey. Data from this survey was used to set today's cotton estimates. Now, for this survey, we contacted 479 gins, which represents all known active gins for the current crop season. Data collection occurred between December 1st and December 3rd. Now, the gins report the number of bales gin to date from the 2025 crop year and an estimate of how many more they expect to gin through the end of the season. Now, I do want to mention that today's report includes this special note alerting data users that citrus production estimates for the state of Florida are not included in the report. Now, historically, NAS has published Florida citrus estimates in December based on external funding as part of a cooperative agreement with the state of Florida. However, due to changes to that funding, we will now publish citrus estimates for Florida and all program states quarterly starting on January 12, 2026. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the data, starting with cotton by looking at how this year's harvest compares to the previous 5 seasons. Now, the information presented in this slide comes from our weekly crop progress and condition survey. Each line on the graph represents the percent of the crop harvested between 2020 and 2025. The red line represents the current year. Now, as noted on the slide, data for October 5th through November 9th is not available since reports were not published during that time frame. However, as you can see, based on the data we published, we had a pretty normal harvest this year. In fact, as of November 23rd, 79% of the crop had been harvested compared with the 5-year average pace of 80%. All right, looking at today's cotton numbers, planted acreage at nearly 9.3 million acres is unchanged from the previous estimate, but is down 16.9% from last season. Harvested acres are forecast at 7.37 million acres, also unchanged from the previous forecast, but down 5.6% from last year. Yield is now forecast at 929 pounds per acre. That is up 1.1% or 10 pounds per acre from the November forecast, and up 4.9% or 43 pounds from last year. And then production is forecast at 14.3 million bales. That is up 1.1% from last month, but 1% less than was produced in 2024. Now, looking at the average U.S. cotton yield over the past 30 years with the trend line plotted, you can see how this year's forecasted yield of 929 pounds per acre compares to the previous year in trend. Now, the 2025 forecasted cotton yield represents the second highest yield on record for the U.S., only behind 2022. All right, let's now look at the current yield forecast by state. Now, on this map, the top number in each state represents the current cotton yield forecast. The bottom number represents the percent change from the previous month. States colored in blue are showing an increase from the previous month, whereas the states colored in red are showing a decrease. Now, the darker the shade, the greater the percent change. And then also states colored gray are unchanged from the previous month. Now, looking across the growing region, you can see increases from last month in the Southeast and Delta and decreases in the Southern Plains. Now, you will also notice a pound sign beside the yield number in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Tennessee, indicating record high cotton yields for those states this year. All right, this map is very similar to the one we just looked at, but now we are comparing the current yield to the final 2024 state yields to see the year-over-year changes for the individual states. All right, this chart shows U.S. cotton production over the last 10 seasons. So you can compare this year's forecast production of 14.3 million bales to the previous 9 seasons. All right, let's now look at how today's NASS production forecast compares to pre-report industry expectations. Now, each blue dot on the chart represents an individual industry member's published expectations of cotton production, and the red square represents the NASS production forecast of 14.3 million bales. Now, as you can see, the NASS forecast falls within the range of expectations, but may be slightly higher than some had anticipated. All right, today's report also includes updated estimates for sugarcane. Harvested acres are forecast at 939,000 acres. That's unchanged from the previous forecast, but up 2.1% from last year. Yield is forecast at 38.1 tons per acre, also unchanged from the previous forecast, but up 1.9% from last year. Production at 35.8 million tons is up 0.1% from the previous forecast and up 4% from the previous season. Now, the reason you see a minor change in production from last month, but no change in the yield forecast is due to minor production changes at the state level that were not large enough to change the rounded yield. All right, this slide highlights a few of the upcoming reports through the rest of December and into January. Now, I do want to point out that the CARES report scheduled for December 10th and the agricultural prices report on December 15th are rescheduled reports due to the lapse in federal funding. Now, the CARES reports will include data originally scheduled for release on November 3rd and December 1st, whereas the Ag Prices Report will include data originally scheduled for release on October 31st and November 28th. And then just looking at a few other reports on that slide, on December 23rd, we'll be releasing our Hogs and Pigs report. And then on January 20th, as you know, it's a very busy day for NASS. I got several reports going out that day, including our crop production annual summary, our December 1 grain stocks, and the winter wheat and canola seedings. And I also want to mention that NASS published the full 2026 release calendar last week, and that can be found on our website. All right, on February 19th and 20th, the USDA will be holding the 102nd Annual Agricultural Outlook Forum at the Crystal Gateway Marriott Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. This will be a hybrid event, and information pertaining to registration will be coming soon. Now, as mentioned earlier, Lance will be on X at 1:30 today for Stat Chat, answering questions about the numbers in today's report. So this concludes the 2025 December crop production report briefing. Now, as a reminder, today's reports and all NASS reports and data can be found on our website. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark, who will cover the WASDE.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me walk you through the WASDE report for this month. Typical of a December month, relatively small changes, not a lot of new information from NASS. So you'll notice most of the domestic balance sheets have only small changes, but we are going to focus a little bit on the Southern Hemisphere, Argentina in particular, focusing on their wheat crop. Excellent conditions there, leading to expectations of a record large crop. So let's start in with global wheat production. Again, record production raised again this month, almost 9 million tons across all of the major global producers. Argentina, we'll talk a little bit more in the next few slides. Canada, that's final data from Stat Canada, record yield and production there. Australia raised excellent growing conditions there as well. This is consistent with an increased forecast by ABARES as well. European Union up also on government data. That would be record production for the EU 27. So excluding the UK, of course. Russia, wheat production raised 1 million tons. And there too, we're looking at record spring wheat production in Russia. And India raised it as well, also looking at record production and yield there. So big increases across most of the major producing countries. So real quick, let's talk about Argentina. I mentioned already the excellent growing conditions that they've been experiencing this year. So quick map here just of the main growing regions within Argentina. Harvest now is underway, not quite into the Buenos Aires yet, which tends to be the highest yielding, largest production region of the country. But those three states, as you can see there, Santa Fe, Cordoba, and Buenos Aires account for about roughly 80% of the production in the country. And essentially it is this chart alone really tells the story for the most part for Argentina. Really excellent timely rains throughout the growing season, well above average. The black line, of course, being average precipitation over the course of the growing season. The red line this year, the 2026 crop. No heat stress as well, so good moisture, no heat stress, ideal textbook type conditions for wheat in Argentina. And then also during the critical filling stage. So this is November precipitation map for Argentina. Very good moisture, 100 to 125% of normal for the main production regions there as well. So what does that lead to? Again, record production, record yield for Argentina. Production raised this month up 9% from last month, and we'll continue to watch it. Harvest is really still in its early stages, so potentially this could still go higher. We'll continue to monitor it. Global wheat balance sheet. Again, talk about production, record global wheat production raised again this month, almost 9 million tons. Global wheat trade up, that mainly reflects higher exports out of Canada, Australia, and Argentina, partially offset by lower exports from Ukraine and Turkey. And then ending stocks, global ending stocks up about 3.4 million tons this month. Just mainly spread across all the countries that have higher production. So higher stocks in most of the producing countries. U.S. wheat balance sheet, no changes this month. I will note, just kind of behind the curtain here, there are some by class offsetting changes in both exports and stocks, but shows up overall as no change in the domestic balance sheet. No change to price either. Global rice production. Let's move into rice here. Not as much going on here in, compared to wheat. Few items worth noting. India, rice production raised. That is increased area for the Kharif crop. And with India, again, when you see a production increase there, that is going to be another record. Many annual records in a row. This is just continuing that trend. Philippines rice production down a bit this month. That reflects typhoon damage in that country. And ABARES down, Australia down a bit just on a ABARES estimate. Overall, globally, rice production down 500,000 tons. So relatively small global change. Global rice supply and demand, so the balance sheet here. Beginning stocks, we're carrying in a little bit higher beginning stocks this month globally than we had forecasted last month. That reflects some revisions to, there's some revisions to India, some stocks data, some new government data from India showing higher stocks, rice stocks within India. So that boosts up supplies a bit. Trade, small change this month, raised global exports by 300,000 tons. That is primarily Burma, where they've had some pretty good business in broken rice. So that's increased broken rice exports out of Burma. And then the higher ending stocks there, that is also mainly held in India as well. So both beginning stocks and ending stocks raised this month, reflecting higher stocks in India. U.S. rice balance sheet. Mainly what we're looking at here is some updated updates based on recent trade data, including some of the trade data that we're still getting caught up on that was in the spring shutdown. Our import forecast, we lowered 1 million hundredweight. That at 49.7 million hundredweight, that's still record imports. But we are starting to see maybe a little bit slower pace of imports of aromatic rice from Thailand. So that's pulling that forecast down a bit, but still, again, record rice imports, long grain. They're mainly aromatics. Export forecast, we also reduced 2 million hundredweight, and that is all long grain as well. Just a slow pace to Western Hemisphere markets primarily there. So lower imports, lower exports, ending stocks raised 1 million hundredweight, and with those higher stocks, that's putting some pressure on prices. Season average all rice price lowered $1.10 per hundredweight this month, and all of the classes, all of the rice, all prices for all of the rice classes were reduced this month. All right, let's move into corn. Corn, this time of year, we're mainly looking at harvest results and from the Northern Hemisphere crops that were just harvested. So that's mostly what is reflected in this data here. Canada, corn production reduced 700,000 tons. That's data from Stat Canada. European Union up. That is mainly higher production in Spain, Hungary, Romania, and Poland. And you will note that the one main laggard here in terms of production is Ukraine. They've had some really poor weather at harvest, excessive rain. So that's impacting that production output, lower yield, and potentially lower harvested area. Russia, on the other hand, raised 400,000 tons. That's a lower area, more than offset by higher yields. And that is government data from Russia. Global corn balance sheet. So I put up the back year here along with the current year. So the back year, I put it up just to note Note a few things, mainly that Argentina's export performance has really been underperforming. This 1.4 million ton reduction in trade on the back year, that reflects a 2 million metric ton reduction in Argentina's export forecast, partially offset by higher exports from the US. And then with that, lower exports by Argentina, that raises their ending stocks, and that's where we're carrying in this 1.7 million ton increase in beginning stocks into the new crop year. So again, that increase reflects higher stocks in Argentina. Production we talked about down a bit this month. Feed use lowered 2.2 million tons, and that is lower feed use in Ukraine, mainly in Ukraine, Canada, and Nigeria, all reflecting lower production in those countries. Global trade raised 1.6 million tons this month. That's mainly higher exports by the US, offsetting lower exports from Ukraine, reflecting their smaller crop. Despite the reduction in Ukraine's export forecast this month, we're still anticipating 23 million tons coming out of Ukraine. That would be up from last year. Ending stocks, global ending stocks tightening up 2.2 million tons this month, reflecting tighter ending stocks in the US, Ukraine, partially offset by higher ending stocks in Argentina. US corn balance sheet, again, put up the back year here, just to reflect the fact that we're getting caught up on some trade data. So incorporating the latest census trade data, increased our export forecast for the back year, 28 million bushels. That comes mainly out of feed and residual, leaving ending stocks unchanged. But again, looking at the new crop year, the crop recently harvested, very good export campaign going on right now. Very strong export pace, raised 125 million bushels this month, up to a record 3.2 billion bushel exports. And notable that for this quarter, for the first quarter, exports have been unusually strong, perhaps record for the first quarter of the marketing year. So those higher exports tighten up ending stocks by the same amount. And that is the main change to this month's balance sheet, no change to our season average market price. So now we'll move into soybeans, global soybean production. Again, relatively small changes here globally, mainly reflecting government data. Canada soybean production reduced 200,000 tons. That's a Stat Canada data there. India raised 500,000 tons, also based on government data. Also worth noting, not listed there on the list of countries, Russia soybean production was raised, and Ukraine's was reduced, both based on harvest data and government reports. So global soybean balance sheet. Few things I'll note here. Crush forecast raised this month 300,000 tons. That it mainly is just India and Russia, reflecting the larger crops there. And trade lowered 300,000 tons. That is lower exports out of Ukraine, reflecting the smaller crop there. Ending stocks, the increased ending stocks this month, 400,000 tons, is higher stocks in Brazil and Russia. US soybean balance sheet, no changes on the out year for the current crop year, but on the back year, again, incorporating some of those trade changes, finalizing that balance sheet based on data that was unavailable during the shutdown. That is the balance sheet that we would have gone out with in November had that data been available. So, but ultimately no change to ending stocks, just some changes in trade and use. Cotton production. Global cotton production, we heard about the US cotton production up a little bit. Anthony talked about the NAS numbers. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that as well. Otherwise, that small increase in the US partially offsets reduction in the forecast for the African Frank zone, bringing global cotton production down about 300,000 bales. That African Frank zone reduction, that is just an area reduction based on government data. Global cotton balance sheet, small changes here as well. Consumption, global cotton consumption reduced this month, 300,000 bales. Brazil's mill use was reduced 100,000 bales. US was down as well. And then various other small changes in some South American countries. Trade down as well. No major outlier there, just lots of small changes, lots of small adjustments, trade adjustments across the many producing and exporting countries. Ending stocks, global ending stocks, virtually unchanged this month. So the US balance sheet, so incorporating the change we got this morning from NAS, higher production in the US, 550,000 bales, combined with lower mill use. We reduced mill use 100,000 bales. For some perspective there, the mill use has been declining pretty precipitously for quite some time now. This US mill use forecast here now, 1.6 million bales, is the lowest in about 150 years. So an industry that has declined sharply over the past few decades. Ending stocks up a bit, given the combination of higher production and lower mill use. And stock prices under some pressure. Lowered our season average price 2 cents per pound down to 60 cents per pound. That'll be down 3 cents year over year if realized. And again, for a little bit of perspective, 60 cents per pound this year would be down about 31 cents per pound since the 2021 crop year. All right, let's move into sugar. Few things to talk about here on the production side. Beet sugar production down 113,000 short tons this month. Mainly that is an issue with beet pile shrink. So basically losses in storage, reducing output there. Cane, on the other hand, cane production up 136,000 short tons this month. Mainly processor reporting here, higher production mainly in Florida and Louisiana. Also worth noting, we reduced our high tier forecast 25 million short tons this month. Kind of an unusual change. A figure that we've been kind of chasing higher for quite some time, but we pulled it back a bit this month. Starting to get some sense that the full effect of the tariffs on Brazil are going to start to be felt probably late in the spring. Felt by consumers late in the spring, rising, increasing those prices. Up until now, we've had a pretty good influx of sugar before the tariffs hit, and then also inventories in place. But once those full tariff effects start to hit later in the spring, we expect to see some reduction in demand, especially for the organic specialty sugars. So just pulling our forecast back a bit there to reflect that. And at the same time, domestic deliveries overall down, also 23,000 short tons. Just some, general demand weakness, possible dietary shifts in U.S. sugar consumption there. Ending stocks up just a little bit this month, 21,000 short tons. Mexico sugar balance sheet. For the most part, as you know, really no implications here on the U.S. since our export limit is already reached for Mexico. Production changes here. Most of these numbers reflect information from FAS Post in Mexico. Production raised 75,000 metric tons this month. So just, up over 5 million metric tons, up from last year, but still not fully recovered from 3 years ago with devastating drought. Prior to that, when we were, up near 6 million tons. So Mexico sugar production still not back to its pre-drought levels. Exports raised this month 152,000 tons. Now that 800,000 metric tons of exports there, of course, includes about 188,000 to the U.S. based on the export U.S. needs already established. So the 152,000 ton increase is all to third countries. Ending stocks, so just over 1 million metric tons. That, of course, is established by the government to equal about 2.5 months of supply. Exports then being the residual, so they export what they have in excess of 2.5 months of need. All right, let's wrap up crops and move into livestock. So starting with meat production, beef production in particular. Beef production raised for both 2025 and 2026 this year. And of course, now we're also shifting to calendar years. And those beef production increases this month reflect almost exclusively heavier weights. It's obviously one way to increase production when inventories are constrained and low, you put more weight on the animals. So that's what they're doing. Pork, on the other hand, pork production, small changes this month. We know we're going to have a hogs and pigs report later in the month, so we'll make some adjustments based on that. But for 2025, pull pork production back just a bit based on fourth quarter slaughter data. For our broilers and turkeys, we're incorporating some newly released updated NAS production and slaughter data that was missed during the shutdown. So truing up to that, especially for broilers. Turkey production, on the other hand, this is especially looking forward into 2026, taking account of some HPAI outbreaks, especially affecting breeding operations. So that could have some impact on production capacity throughout next calendar year. So that's the reduction next year for turkey production that we made this month. In terms of prices, steer prices, we lowered for both 2025 and 2026, and we've seen some recent relative weakness. I'd say relative because these are still very strong prices, but relative weaknesses both in cash prices and futures. And then into 2026 as well, we know that there's been some recent announcements of slaughter capacity reductions, which can also likely to weigh on those prices, but still very strong prices overall for cattle, and strong increase year over year of $11 per hundredweight. Hogs, on the other hand, not as much happening there in terms of prices. Just reflecting recent data, pulled down our fourth quarter price forecast for 2025 and carried that into the first quarter of 2026. No other changes on our price forecasts for the further quarters into 2026. And finally, poultry, no changes to our broiler price forecast. Turkeys raised a bit for 2025, just reflecting fourth quarter data. And then into 2026, we're anticipating both continued demand strength and potential tighter supplies from these recent HPAI outbreaks. U.S. meat trade, fairly small changes across the board here. Again, incorporating the latest census trade data that brings us up through August. The main change that I think I would highlight here is a fairly large increase in our beef import forecast for 2026. And that just, as you can imagine, that reflects the fact that the tariffs will be removed from especially Brazil, but Australia as well. And that's gonna pull in, some of that imported beef given high US prices and tight supplies. Now we'll wrap things up here with dairy. In terms of milk production, 2025 and 2026, so we're keying here off the latest NAS milk production report, starting to see a little bit of evidence maybe of inventories, cow inventory starting to level off. But milk per cow continues to grow, so no change to the production forecast for 2025. Pulled back our 2026 production forecast just a bit. Again, reflecting maybe some smaller inventories, partially offset by continued growth in milk per cow. In terms of product trade, the main story here is with butter, and that's on a fat basis, imports and exports here. Strong US butter supplies and competitive prices, leading to lower imports and higher exports. So that's mainly what's driving those changes in the fat basis trade forecasts, and that is expected to carry into 2026. On the other hand, skim solids basis exports, especially into 2026, we're seeing some possible reduction in US exports of skim milk powder products, especially non-fat dry milk, and reflecting strong demand for protein in the US. And kind of wrapping things up here with dairy product prices. Main story here, so strong supplies across all of the products, weighing on prices generally. You'll recall last month we made a pretty notable reduction in our butter price forecast, and now this month we pulled our cheese price forecast for 2025 down as well, expecting that to carry into 2026. Again, strong supplies weighing on those prices. But on the other hand, in terms of dry whey and non-fat dry milk, to some degree, strong protein demand supporting providing some price strength there. In terms of dairy prices, the class prices and all milk prices, 2025 class 3 price down this month 5 cents per hundredweight. Class 4 price up actually a bit, just reflecting some relative strength non-fat dry milk, more than offsetting lower butter prices. And then for next year, lower class prices, class 3 and class 4. Class 4 in particular, weighed down by those lower butter price forecasts. And next year, 2026, all milk price at $18.75 per hundredweight. Margin's getting a little bit tight in there, so maybe approaching that dairy margin protection trigger. So that is all I have in terms of the December WASDE. Hope this shed a little bit of light into our logic in putting these balance sheets together. And so I thank you all for attending, and thank also those who joined online, and we'll see you. Happy holidays. We will see you back.